Hey folks, Jordan with TYT Politics. Hope you had a nice weekend. I am here in New York doing a little reporting this week. Not sure where I'm going next, but we'll let you know. The country is still insane and getting less sane by the day, hence why I'm wearing the Make America Sane Again hat. Full disclosure, my uncle came up with this phrase. He's selling hats, t-shirts, the whole nine. So if you're interested, makeamericasane.com. That's makeamericasane.com. Well, I was working on a story last week, and over the weekend I finished it. It just went up on the Young Turks Medium page. That's the Young Turks on Medium. So go check it out on medium.com at the Young Turks page. It is about the Trump administration's drastic cuts to the EPA and how those cuts will directly and indirectly further pour gasoline on lead poisoned communities like Flint, Michigan, and East Chicago, Indiana. As you know, I've been to Flint and East Chicago several times each. So this is a story that's important to me and should be important to you. Water, ground soil, many things have been contaminated and lives have been harmed. And it's not getting much coverage anywhere else. So I'm staying on the story. So I basically looked into all the cuts that have been disclosed that Trump is looking to do. He is looking to cut the EPA by upwards of 31%. 31% cut to the EPA. And by the way, even before the cuts, the EPA has been questionable. As you've seen, my reporting has shown suspect water testing. Looking, testing in a certain way that kind of cherry picks the numbers, makes it look like lead numbers are improving in certain communities when outside independent testers come in and find much higher numbers. So the EPA is not terrific as it is already, but 31% cut is not good for anyone, particularly the American people. So I wrote this story that spotlights the different cuts that are going into effect and how they might harm Flint and East Chicago, Indiana. So there's several aspects of this. The EPA, on the record, tells me that no previous grants that were allotted to Flint will be cut. So Flint got that 100 million coming to them through a bill that became law from Congress at the end of last year. That won't be affected. East Chicago, to this point, has had no federal grants, even though it's nearly a year that this story has been out there. The EPA couldn't answer whether there's any grants on the chopping block to East Chicago. The guy I spoke with told me that so far he doesn't know about any grants to East Chicago. Flint, they tell me that previous grants have not been cut and won't be cut, but they have not answered me yet on whether future grants to Flint or East Chicago will be affected. So that's important. So I wanted to highlight some of the cuts here. One of the biggest cuts looming is to the Great Lakes Restoration Project. This started in 2010, cleaning up the Great Lakes. It's a $289 million program annually. So $289 million, nearly $300 million is allotted to this program annually. They have 71 full-time employees. Trump is gutting it by 97%. So it's going to be going from $289 million down to $10 million a year. So the lakes, which hold 84% of North America's surface freshwater and economically or environmentally affect the daily lives of nearly 30 million people. They've been a dumping ground for some of the worst industrialized polluters, specifically in states like Indiana that have some of the most lax environmental regulations in the country. So basically, if the Great Lakes cleanup is cut by 97%, down to 10 million, you know who's going to suffer? Indirectly or directly, Flint, Michigan. So the Great Lakes water is the source water for many cities. The Great Lakes water flows into other waters, and those other waters is where cities get their water. So for example, Flint, Michigan gets its water from Lake Huron. Lake Huron is what the original water source for the citizens of Flint were, but then, of course, through the gross negligence and corrupt decision-making of the unelected emergency manager, they switched from clean Lake Huron water over to the toxic Flint River. Well, now they're back on Lake Huron now. Well, Lake Huron, the Great Lakes flows into Lake Huron. So if the Great Lakes Restoration Project, which cleans up the Great Lakes, is cut by 97%, the contamination in the Great Lakes is not getting cleaned up. is not getting cleaned up to the extent it used to be and needs to be. And that contaminated water, which comes from these toxic factories dumping their waste in the water, flows to Lake Huron. And Lake Huron is where Flint gets its water from. So this is a danger to Flint. I got a quote for the story. Eliminating programs that focus on restoring the watersheds. Source water comes from these areas, so we are setting the stage for more Flints. Dr. Adrian Hollis of environmental group We Act told me. And I'm going to put the link to the story I wrote in the YouTube description box. So after this video is done, I'll put it up right away so you could read the story. Please read the story and share the video. So so not only are they going to cut major funds for cleaning the Great Lakes, they're also cutting the Superfund program. East Chicago, it's pronounced Lake Huron. Thank you, Lake Huron. They're cutting the Superfund program by $28.9 million a year. Why is that important? East Chicago, Indiana was declared a Superfund site in 2009. Superfund sites are areas around the country that are, traditionally toxic, very high industrialization rate, factories that pollute. And some of the worst polluters have contaminated Superfund sites. East Chicago, Indiana, many parts of it were built on top of a lead smelting plant. And that's why last year in July, lead levels in the ground soil of one low-income housing complex were found to be over 200 times the allowable limit for lead. At the time, the EPA told me on the ground there's no issue with the water. This is not Flint. This is just a ground soil contamination issue. And of course, 3 months later, it came out this was a water issue, as well as a ground soil issue. So the EPA is going to cut nearly $30 million from the Superfund program. That means cleanup. That means basically police on the beat, people to actually oversee the cleanup, make sure things are being done properly, make sure that the rates for contamination are going down. It's both the cleanup and the observation that would be cut. Again, East Chicago declared in 2009 a Superfund site. What's really dangerous about this is, like I just said, you're removing, it's not just the Superfund programs that are removing people. They're basically cutting over 3,200 Superfund and general EPA enforcement agents are set to be cut as part of EPA's demolition. Here's a quote from Lois Gibbs. Lois Gibbs, I spoke with. She's one of the most infamous environmental activists in the country. She was the original person to sound the alarm on Love Canal, where in upstate New York, when toxic chemicals were surrounding her house and that neighborhood. So Lois Gibbs told me, quote, "If there's no police out there checking industry is going to do what they want. That's really one of the worst things that's going to happen. Refineries, power plants, landfills, they're going to just dump without enough police paying attention. Why would industry do what is right? If they can pollute a little more, which gives them more profit, they will." 100% right. And that's what she told me over the weekend. So not only are we cutting the Superfund program, we're cutting the enforcement agents that are supposed to oversee these Superfund programs and environmental cleanup. Yeah, smart decision by the Trump administration. Going to directly harm areas like East Chicago, Indiana, which are already lead poisoned and not getting the proper attention they need. And if you didn't know, over the weekend it was announced HUD Director Ben Carson will be going down to visit the lead-poisoned citizens of East Chicago, Indiana. This comes after news came last week that the EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt will be visiting on April 19th. Then we got the Great Lakes Restoration Project that's being cut. That's going to directly harm Flint, particularly. Then you have East Chicago. The Superfund program is being cut by nearly $30 million, is going to harm East Chicago. And now we have the lead abatement program. So lead abatement program basically sends in workers to repaint old lead paint homes. There's approximately 38 million homes in the United States with lead-based paint. I think it's more than 38 million. I think that's kind of selling it short, but that's the numbers the EPA gives. So If your home is old, like many of them in the Midwest and around the country, you might have paint that was built. You might have paint that was used in the 1970s, and at a time before lead was removed from paint. So the lead abatement program sends in workers to change and paint over and remove all the lead. It also trains workers on proper lead removal from the homes. I got a quote here from Melissa Mays. She's an activist and resident of Flint, Michigan. She told me, quote, "Further cutting the lead abatement programs will leave too much unfinished in the ground and inside homes. We are an older city with far too many older homes with lead paint and lead plumbing," Flint resident and activist Melissa Mays told me. "Slashing these programs will put a stop to the progress towards recovery being made." Of the 2 lead abatement programs being cut, one includes training for professional remodelers who strip away lead from homes. You're right, Pat. The poor and minorities are considered expendable. 110%. These programs aren't going to be cut in wealthier neighborhoods. I got news for you. So, not only is Trump removing actual funds for lead abatement, he's removing funds to train people. So, the people that are actually going in and changing the paint in what's left of the funds are not going to be up to date and well trained on the most up-to-date methods for lead removal. And Gibbs said, low-income people don't get anything from the government, she told me. So, if that's not enough, Great Lakes Restoration Project being cut, you got the Superfund program being cut, you got the lead abatement program being cut, not cut completely, but a lot of funds. They are also removing altogether, not cutting it, like removing the Environmental Justice Department, which is instrumental in communities like Flint and East Chicago, Indiana, which are low-income minority communities. In Flint, there is definitely poor white folks as well, but Flint right now is predominantly African-American, East Chicago, predominantly African-American and Latino, so they're getting rid of the Environmental Justice Program altogether. Lois Gibbs says, low-income people don't get anything from the government. A community of color that's struggling to stay alive and have housing, that program is really important because it provides extra resources to people who need it. Those resources includes grants, licenses, and regulations for the predominantly low-income and minority communities. And Gibbs went on to say, what the Trump administration is doing is putting these numbers out there without putting forward any details. So they're putting forward the broad numbers of cuts, but they haven't really been that specific on each smaller program that's being cut and how many workers are being cut. So you have the large-scale numbers, but we don't particularly have the meat and potatoes from the Trump administration. So why is this important? Well, like I always say, the Flint story, the East Chicago story, it's just the ones we know about, and we've gotten some media attention. Reuters reported recently there's over 3,000 cities in the United States with worse lead numbers than Flint, Michigan. So this could be your community, and Trump's administration is cutting 31% of the EPA at a time when the water contamination is at record bad numbers in the United States of America. I just did a video on TYT Politics Facebook about Keystone XL pipeline already leaking. It's already leaking and it's not even done being built. And they're cutting 31% to the EPA. And you know what? I will be honest. Viewers might not like this, but I got to give it to you straight. I don't think Hillary Clinton would have been as bad on the environment than President Trump has come out. I think I personally miscalculated. I didn't think Trump was going to be this bad on the environment because I thought he had some semi-smart people around him, like Ivanka Trump, like Jared Kushner, business leaders who many do buy into climate change because they understand climate change is a risk to their business. But Trump is listening to the anarchists, the loony conservatives, and he's basically saying we don't need an environment. We don't need environmental regulations. So I gotta call it like I see it. I don't think Hillary Clinton would be cutting the EPA by 31%. I just don't. It doesn't mean she's not terrible in other areas, but we got to be factual. I don't think, based on her history, she's definitely pro-fracking, but I don't think she'd be across the board cuts like this to the EPA. So that's the deal, folks. I'm going to put the link to this story underneath the video so you can watch it. Please share this story. This could be your community. There's not enough thorough testing being done by the EPA in other vulnerable communities that are built on top of lead plants or built next to industrialized factories. There's not enough funding for that in the first place. And now they're cutting it by 31%. So you're basically taking quicksand and you're digging further and letting Americans sink. Because you know what? We can't have YouTube videos. We can't have political disagreements. We can't all be on social media if eventually we're all dead or not breathing. Please share this video. Thank you for watching. My Twitter at Jordan Chariton. That's JordanChariton. Like my page on Facebook. And here's the hat. Make America Sane. Again, that's makeamericasane.com. Thanks, guys.